There is a kind of silence that is louder than shouting, a kind of composure that makes people nervous, a kind of refusal to engage that feels like domination. This is the silence Machiavelli understood, the power of not arguing. Because to argue is to step onto the battlefield someone else has chosen, and once you do that, you've already lost. Machiavelli believed in influence, control, perception. He knew that power wasn't about brute strength, it was about strategy. And in the game of power, arguing is almost always a losing move. Why? Because arguments appeal to reason, but people are driven by ego, pride, and emotion. The moment you argue, you're trying to win with logic in a game ruled by psychology. And that's a fatal mistake. A man who argues reveals that he is emotionally invested, that he can be triggered, that he needs to prove something. And in the eyes of those who understand power, that is weakness. It's not the facts you lay down that matter, it's the fact that you were provoked enough to lay them down in the first place. This is why Machiavelli and later strategists like Sun Tzu and Robert Greene all repeat one timeless rule: never argue. Influence from a distance, control through suggestion, lead through perception. But never step into the mud pit of back and forth logic battles with people whose minds are already made up. Why? Because arguments don't change people, they entrench them. The more you try to convince someone, the more they resist. Not because you're wrong, but because they now have something to defend, their ego. When you argue, you create enemies. When you stay composed, you create mystery. And mystery is power. Think about it. The moment you argue with someone, you're acknowledging their position. You're validating their perspective by engaging with it. You're stepping into their frame, on their terms. And even if you win, you've lowered yourself to their level of emotional investment. You've shown them what gets under your skin. You've exposed your buttons. But the man who doesn't argue, he's unreadable, untouchable, intimidating. Machiavelli knew that silence was often the loudest move you could make, because it forces the other person to confront themselves. When you refuse to respond, they are left with their own words, their own emotion, their own desperation for control. And in that silence, their power collapses. Because power doesn't come from being right, it comes from being unshaken. In The Prince, Machiavelli advised rulers to appear merciful, faithful, humane, upright, and religious, but to be ready to do the opposite when necessary. Why? Because the appearance of virtue is a tool, and argument often strips that mask away. It reveals emotion, bias, insecurity, and those revelations can be used against you. In court, in politics, in business, in relationships. Those who hold power rarely argue. They state, they suggest, or they say nothing at all. They let their silence speak volumes. Why? Because words can be dissected, twisted, weaponized. But silence is untouchable. And there's something else Machiavelli understood. People remember how you make them feel, far more than what you said. An argument might prove you right, but it also makes someone feel small, cornered, defeated. And people do not forget that feeling. They may concede the point, but inside they begin to resent. And resentment is the seed of rebellion. Nowhere is this more visible than in leadership. The boss who argues with his employees loses respect. The leader who constantly defends his decisions invites doubt. But the one who moves in silence, who listens more than he speaks, who acts without explaining, he holds gravity. People follow that kind of power because it feels stable, reliable, untouchable. Look at the most effective negotiators, diplomats, even generals. They don't argue, they maneuver. They let the other side talk themselves into exhaustion. They give just enough rope. And when the time comes, they act, not with emotional outbursts, but with strategic precision. Because in the game of influence, the loudest man is rarely the most powerful. But let's take this even deeper. When you argue, what you're really doing is begging to be understood. You're saying, "Please see it my way." But Machiavelli would ask, why do you need them to? If your truth is real, why must you scream it? If your position is strong, why must you defend it? Because here's the harsh reality. Arguing is often a covert form of insecurity. The need to prove, to correct, to win. These are rooted in the fear that without explanation, you'll be dismissed. But true power doesn't fear dismissal. True power doesn't need approval. It knows its value in silence. This is why the most composed men are often the most feared. Not because they are aggressive, but because they are immune. You cannot bait them. You cannot trap them into emotional chaos. They do not need to win the room. They are the room. Machiavelli's brilliance wasn't in inventing these ideas. It was in saying them out loud, in stripping the morality out of strategy and showing the mechanics of how power actually works. And in the realm of argument, he was clear. Persuasion is for the powerless. Influence is for the strategic. In modern terms, this plays out in every arena. In business, the person who argues over email or in meetings reveals their emotional investment. But the person who listens, nods, and speaks only when it moves the needle, that's the person who's remembered. The one who says little but gets results. That's Machiavellian power. In relationships, arguing turns love into war. Words become weapons. Truth becomes leverage. But the person who refuses to argue, who instead withdraws, recalibrates, and responds with action rather than reaction, gains control, not out of malice, but out of emotional mastery. Because control is not about domination, it's about self-command. In public image, the person who argues online, who defends every insult, who fights every troll, loses credibility. They become reactive, predictable, but the one who holds their tongue, who lets time and truth reveal itself, that person holds mystique. And mystique, as Robert Greene reminds us, is the cornerstone of influence. You must understand this. When someone tries to argue with you, what they're really doing is inviting you into a power game. And if you step in, you've already accepted their terms. They control the tone, the rhythm, the emotional stakes. But if you stay silent, if you observe, if you let their need to be right expose them, you win without lifting a finger. Machiavelli didn't believe in fairness. He believed in outcomes. And arguments, more often than not, ruin outcomes. They escalate conflict. They entrench positions. They create enemies. They give away energy. And worst of all, they reveal too much. So what do you do instead? You observe. You listen. You measure the terrain. And then you act, decisively, without warning, without debate. You make your moves clean and silent. Let others talk. Let them try to provoke. Let them reveal their emotions, their need to be validated, their weakness. You stay calm. You stay centered. And when the time comes to speak, you speak with finality, not to argue, but to conclude. This is Machiavelli's ultimate power move. Refuse to argue. Speak when it counts. Let silence carry the rest. Because silence cannot be used against you. It cannot be quoted, twisted, or challenged. It floats above the noise, and in its quiet weight, it commands attention. Power doesn't argue. Power declares. It sets the tone. It moves with precision. And the man who truly understands this never feels the need to be understood, because in the end, your greatest weapon is not your argument. It's your indifference. And in that indifference lies your advantage. The power of refusing to argue lies not only in what it avoids, but in what it creates. It creates space. Space where your words are not diluted by desperation. Space where people fill the silence with their own assumptions. Space where your presence alone begins to feel heavier, more mysterious, more authoritative. Because in a world that equates noise with relevance, silence is interpreted as strength. And this is where Machiavelli's genius shines through. He understood that silence isn't absence, it's tension, it's gravity. It pulls people in. When you argue, you push. When you stay silent, you pull. The more someone tries to get a reaction from you, the more your refusal to respond frustrates and exposes them. Watch how this works in real life. The colleague who expects you to defend yourself in front of others, you remain composed, say little, and speak directly to results. You don't address the emotional drama because you're not in the business of performance. And the silence makes everyone pay more attention when you finally do speak. Or the partner who lashes out in a moment of emotion, hoping to spark a fight. If you meet them in that emotional space, you lose frame. But if you stay calm, centered, and choose your words with precision, perhaps saying nothing until the storm passes, you retain not only your power, but your clarity. Arguments create confusion. Composure creates control. Even in social media, the modern coliseum of public arguments, silence can be your most tactical move. The minute you start defending yourself against petty attacks, you're giving away authority. You're no longer leading, you're justifying. And Machiavelli would say, those who must justify themselves are already beneath the audience's judgment. This is not weakness, it is dominance through restraint. But what makes this so difficult for most people is ego. The ego wants to be right, it wants to be understood, it wants to fight for the last word, to leave no insult unpunished, to win the room. But Machiavellian strategy is not about feeding ego, it's about using it, weaponizing it, watching others expose themselves with it while you remain unshaken. Because every argument you avoid gives you information. The more they speak, the more they reveal their insecurities, their motives, their lack of discipline. And the more you stay composed, the more powerful you appear, not because you've hidden something, but because you've mastered what they cannot. And here's the paradox. Those who refuse to argue often gain the most persuasive power. Why? Because silence cannot be refuted. A man who doesn't argue is not submitting. He's observing. He's conserving energy. He's deciding when and how to respond with maximum impact. His silence isn't retreat, it's precision. Let's go even further. There's something even darker Machiavelli understood. When you argue, you often teach your opponent how to manipulate you. You reveal your values, your insecurities, your triggers. The more you talk, the more ammunition you give them. They now know what gets to you, what provokes you, what makes you chase validation. And in the wrong hands, that knowledge is power. But if they can't provoke you, if you don't react, if their most emotional statements are met with composure, you become unreadable. And the unreadable man is the most dangerous man in the room. This doesn't mean you never speak. It means you speak when the time is right, and only when the words serve your position. The Machiavellian mind doesn't avoid conflict out of fear. It avoids it out of understanding. Because real power is not reactive, it is selective. This kind of presence, the man who does not argue, who does not plead, who does not chase the crowd's approval, becomes magnetic. People lean in, they watch closely. Because this man is different. He's not performative, he's not defensive, he's not insecure. He simply acts and lets his actions speak. In The Art of War, Sun Tzu echoes this very principle. Appear weak when you are strong, and strong when you are weak. The supreme art of war is to subdue the enemy without fighting. And that's what Machiavelli's no-argument rule is, psychological warfare without combat. The most powerful man is not the one who can argue the longest. It's the one who doesn't need to. He sees the trap before stepping into it. He recognizes when someone is baiting him into emotional warfare, and instead of accepting the invitation, He quietly lets it expire. So how do you use this in the real world, in arguments with people who want your reaction? Pause, breathe, say nothing, or say something calm and finite. That's your opinion. Or simply, noted. Then walk away. Let them spin. Let them escalate. You've already won. In debates over social media or messaging, if it doesn't move your mission forward, don't engage. You do not owe your energy to every voice that calls your name. Silence, in these cases, is not avoidance. It's filtration. It separates what matters from what doesn't. In relationships, refuse to get pulled into arguments that exist to test your emotional control. Instead of matching chaos, you slow down. You detach from the need to be understood in the moment. You choose strategic patience over egoic reaction. And in business, let your results speak louder than your defenses. Don't explain why you're right. Show that you were. Machiavelli knew this. People believe results more than words, and results never argue. But here's the final, most powerful truth. You don't need to win arguments when you've already won yourself. When your identity isn't built on other people agreeing with you, when your mood isn't dictated by someone else's tone, when your peace isn't disturbed by people who scream for attention while you sit in silence. That's power. That's sovereignty. And it's rare, because most men are still trapped in performance. They fight battles just to be seen. They chase debate just to feel smart. They cling to the last word as if it proves something. But the ones who've truly evolved, the ones who've read The Prince and lived it, understand this. The last word is useless if you've already lost your center. So let others argue. Let them posture. Let them exhaust themselves with words and emotional drama. You stay calm, stay observant, stay still. Because in that stillness, something happens. People begin to feel your weight. They begin to wonder what you're thinking. They fill in the silence with their own projections. They respect you, not because you forced them to, but because you didn't need to. And that's the secret Machiavelli left behind. The greatest displays of power are not loud, they are quiet. Not because they lack force, but because they lack desperation. Not because they're passive, but because they are precise. The man who does not argue wins without fighting. He leads without explaining. He influences without begging. He is not afraid to be misunderstood, because he understands something far deeper. That silence held with discipline is more feared than 1,000 arguments shouted in rage.